Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, April 14th, day 556 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emmanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
We are going to get caught up after this long holiday weekend, and we'll learn what is happening on the ground in Gaza. Manny will also make a little sense out of the plethora of protest letters that we have been seeing in protest of the ongoing war in order to get the hostages out now. We'll also hear what U.S. Israeli citizen hostage Edan Alexander said in a recently released Hamas propaganda video that was recorded of him while in captivity. And we will also learn about a first aerial exercise between Israel, many other countries, including Qatar. All of this and more when we're back. Yesterday, the family of Edan Alexander approved the publication of a Hamas propaganda video that was released on Saturday, and it shows, of course, signs of life from Edan, but also a dictated message decrying the current stance of the government in not ending the war. The video is very difficult to watch, but it is a second sign of life from Edan since November. Edan, of course, was born in Tel Aviv, but grew up in New Jersey. He came to Israel as a lone soldier and fought in the Golani unit. Manny, what else, first of all, can you tell us about Edan? And then we'll talk about the contents of this very disturbing video.
So Edan Alexander was stationed on the morning of October 7th at the so-called White House army post. It's on the border in the southern section of the border. We've covered his abduction in some of the IDF investigations already, and he was taken alive from there. Other soldiers were killed at this army post, and he's been held, in Gaza since October 7th. This is the second video of him, which is interesting. Hamas sometimes, in some cases, released more than one video of certain hostages. The first one was released back in November, and that was the first time that Israel had sort of heard from him. I don't think Hamas realized that it was a Chag over the weekend. Normally they release these videos during the protests that occur every Saturday night, but because it was Passover, that those protests weren't happening that evening, at least not on the same scale. And this video is very similar to the others we've heard. The statement that he reads, we can see that clearly some of it is coming from him, and other parts are being dictated by the Hamas terrorists, the messaging that he's saying there. But I mean, you can see that there is sort of things that he's saying that at least I genuinely believe that it's coming directly from him, asking why he's still here and why he's not home with his family. Of course, there's a lot of criticism against Netanyahu in there, and calling on Trump to return him since he's a US citizen. But we've seen this sort of thing many times already in various videos released by Hamas over the past few months.
Let's hear an excerpt now.
אני החייל עידן אלכסנדר, ואני אסיר בעזה כבר יותר מ-551 ימים.
Manny, in watching the video, it appears that at least part of it was filmed in a tunnel, but does the IDF, I mean, obviously we can't divulge any really sensitive material, but does the IDF have any idea where the hostages are? Are they in the north, the center, or the south of Gaza? Is there any kind of information we know?
I'll say this very carefully. The IDF knows a lot about where the hostages are being held. Not for all of them. There are hostages where signs of life have not been received in a long time or a long enough time to actually understand where they are. But Israel has generally a relatively good picture of where the hostages are, and it's adapted its operations in Gaza to that. So, for example, the IDF is now pushed into southern Gaza, and we'll talk about this soon. The areas it's pushed into, it believes that no hostages are being held in those areas because Hamas, of course, have previously threatened to kill hostages in areas that the army is pushing into. So the army adapts all of its operations, all of its airstrikes as well, to not target areas where hostages are being held. But of course, it doesn't know everything. It can't say that it knows everything because there's always an unknown with regard to Gaza. But as the war has gone on, I think Israel's gained a better intelligence picture of what's happening regarding the hostages. Over time, it's able to sort of fill in this picture and understand where they are being held.
We are hearing increasing rumbles from reservists and some active fighters who are protesting and asking for the war to end in order to get the hostages out. And this morning, we learned that over 1,600 former IDF paratroopers and infantry soldiers signed a letter. And the letter states, "We, the fighters and commanders of the paratroopers and infantry units whose flag bears the words, 'We do not leave wounded behind on the battlefield,' call for the return of the hostages, even at the cost of halting the fighting. This is a call to save lives." This is just, of course, the latest appeal in a growing amount of public pressure to end the ongoing war. We've had letters from reservist doctors, the Talpiot program, former Shmone Matayim intelligence unit members, and ex-Mossad members, the Navy, the Air Force, everything. But it is, of course, the Air Force that has brought the most attention. So Manny, talk to us a little bit about this. I think it was 1,000 pilot reservists who signed onto a letter. And they're not really reservists, are they? Because most of the pilots are pretty much active. Is that right?
Yeah, the 1,000, I mean, we use the term veterans, and I think that's a lot more accurate to describe the people who signed on this letter. And it's important to note this letter doesn't actually call to refuse to serve in the military or anything, but they do sort of demand the end of the war in order to return the hostages. I think that's important to note. But regarding who signed it, so the army did some checks into who's on the letter, and out of the 1,000, only 60 of them are active reservists. The other 950 or so, or 900 or so, are those who are, retired for quite a while, much older and no longer in active reserves. And there's also quite a significant number of people on this signed onto this letter who the army doesn't even know who they are. People who are maybe claiming to be part of the Air Force or never were. Among these 60 who are active reservists, a handful are actually pilots. The rest are serving in headquarters roles and are sort of not competent fighters. They haven't been doing training or anything in the last years in order to actually make them competent pilots. So the army has said, and the chief of the Air Force, Tomer Bar, and the IDF chief of staff, they've said that those who are active reservists who have signed on this letter will be dismissed from reserve duty. They haven't gone through with this yet, and I think that there's still some sort of wiggle room for them to renounce their signature on the letter. But even if they were to dismiss all 60 of them, we're not going to see any harm to the sort of competency of the Israeli Air Forces. They hold an array of having pilots that are ready to go, because pretty much all of them are not pilots or not competent pilots, or have been going through training, at least in recent years. The army hasn't dismissed them yet, and I can explain why the army wants to dismiss them. It's not because of sort of what they're calling for. It's because they're using their uniform, they're using their service in the Israeli Air Force to sort of demand something political. Of course, reservists are civilians. They can do whatever they want. They can protest whatever they want. The army doesn't have a problem with that. The problem is when they use, the army says they use the Air Force brand, they use their uniform in order to protest political matters. That's when the army doesn't like it. Although this sort of attempt to try and dismiss them doesn't seem to be, announcing this has only really increased the pressure. And I think because of this, the move the army has announced to try and dismiss them, we've seen even more letters come out from other units and other former soldiers or former officers also calling for the same thing. It basically sort of backfired on the army, but we'll see. They haven't gone through with the dismissing anybody just yet.
There are a couple reservists a couple types of reservists, let's say, who really continue on for a very long time. And as noted, the pilots are one type of reservist that just, I think, decades out of their official service, they continue training and serving. And certainly since the war broke out, I mean, all the pilots I know have really been fully active, shall we say. And another type of service is doctors. And of course, the Army has a program in which young people can be trained as doctors, and at the same time, they have to give up many years of their lives and work in the Army as doctors. So some of these reservist doctors, I assume, are this type of doctor. Some others are probably doctors who are serving the reserve duty in the capacity of doctors. And Manny, it just appears to me that this ripple effect of these letters from these people who are serving decades of their lives, I mean, not to at all denigrate the service of those who are infantrymen and paratroopers and things like that, but those who are really necessary for the functioning of the army, such as these doctors and pilots, it is a bit of a snowball here. And I just wonder, there's no way that you can stop it if you're going to start really releasing everyone from this very necessary service. So is there some kind of backup plan here?
Yeah, I don't think that Israel, the army, will go through with dismissing all of these people who are in critical roles, doctors and pilots and otherwise. There was thought to do it, a year or more than a year ago, 2 years ago almost now, with the whole judicial overhaul protest, and they never went through. They dismissed one person and then they brought him back like a week later. So I don't really see Israel, the army pushing through with this and dismissing everybody, because you can't replace all these people. The army anyway has personnel shortages right now, and has been calling for more soldiers to serve, the ultra-Orthodox especially. They can't afford to just dismiss thousands or hundreds or even dozens of people in critical roles. So I think there's going to be some sort of compromise found, but at the same time, I don't see the army just agreeing to ending the war to return the hostages, because that's not something that's really realistic right now. We know this from all the negotiations that are ongoing with Hamas. We know that Hamas is not just going to release all the hostages if Israel just says it's ending the war, because Hamas, they're not stupid. They know that Israel will go back in afterwards. And that's why there's negotiations that are ongoing. And I don't think it's realistic to sort of demand that the army just one-sided just end the war and expect Hamas to release all the hostages. The sides will have to come some sort of agreement there. So yeah, both sides can't really expect to do what they want.
Right. And of course, it's not actually the army's decision. It is the decision of the political echelon. And that's who they are actually aiming their letters to, while perhaps harming some of their comrades at arms if they were to not show up to service. So we'll see how this plays out, actually. And let's go to a short break. And we're back. On Saturday at noon, the IDF announced that it had fully encircled Rafah in southern Gaza, taking what they're calling the Morag corridor, which is in the southern Gaza Strip, and connects it to the Philadelphia corridor. So now, essentially, it sounds like, Manny, the city of Rafah is fully encircled and cut off from the rest of the strip. What does this mean in terms of strategic, tactical purposes?
So the army will now be operating in areas of Rafah that it previously didn't go into with ground forces yet. In the summer last year, the army operated in Rafah, mainly on the Philadelphia corridor area and Tel Sultan in the northwestern part of the city, and areas close to the Philadelphia corridor, close to the Egypt border, but it didn't go deeper into Rafah, sort of towards the north. It's hard to sort of think about it the way that the Gaza is orientated, but the army will now go into areas of Rafah that it previously didn't go into. It will clear them of Hamas infrastructure and any remaining operatives that are in the area. And eventually, and I don't know how long this will take, I don't have an exact schedule, but eventually Rafah will be basically part of Israel's buffer zone. And you can see this on the maps that the IDF has released, basically from the Egypt border all the way up until the outskirts of Khan Yunis. So it's about 5 or even 6 kilometers away in some areas. That will all be part of a huge buffer zone, part of the army's defenses on the Gaza border. The buffer zone as well in other areas has been expanded, almost doubled in some areas, up to 2 kilometers. So it's really going to be a huge buffer zone around all areas of Gaza, and Rafah is sort of the main, one of the largest sections of it. It may take time to do these clearing operations. It could be several weeks, or it could be a month or 2 months even, but it's something that we'll follow. And then the Morag corridor, which sort of runs parallel to the Philadelphia corridor, just 5 kilometers into Gaza. The army is now in the middle of constructing a road there, like it did in Philadelphia, like in Netzarim. It's constructing a road so it can use it for logistics and to launch raids from those areas, and then prepare itself for what the defense minister has been calling the big move, where Israel launches a very intensive offensive against Hamas to basically defeat it. Right now, these operations are still at a relatively low level of intensity. These operations are now to clear Rafah and to establish the corridor, are preparing for this much bigger battle that could happen eventually if Hamas does not agree to a new hostage deal.
So, assuming Hamas does not agree, and in the meantime, where are the people of Rafah? Because obviously it was one of the major cities in Gaza. So where is the population now?
They're mainly in the Al-Mawasi area on the coast, sort of near Khan Yunis. They're in Khan Yunis as well. The vast majority of the population is in the Deir al-Balach and the Nusirat area. Those two towns in central Gaza are areas where the army has not operated in at all and actually carried out very limited airstrikes in those areas. If you see pictures from those areas, you'll see standing buildings, you'll see open markets, you'll see everything basically operating mostly as usual. There were of course strikes in those areas, but much less than other parts of Gaza. So the vast majority of the population in those areas. There's also a significant population still in Gaza City, including those who never went south at the beginning of the war, and some who sort of came back up during the ceasefire. We know that Israel allowed Palestinians to return to North Gaza, but very quickly many of them actually returned back to the south because they realized that there's nothing for them to find in Gaza City. But some have stayed, so there is still, I don't have the exact numbers, but there are still civilians in Gaza City. The army is going to try and push them down south in order to operate in Gaza City again. But this will also take time. I don't know at what stage that will happen. But Rafah itself is essentially emptied of civilians. I think it was around 200,000 or 250,000 Palestinians evacuated from the Rafah area in the last couple of weeks when the IDF launched its offensive there. There could be still civilians in Rafah, and the army will allow them to evacuate now that it's encircled the area. When it goes in and it starts to find civilians who are still there, it will enable them to leave through sort of organized corridors that the army has established in other areas of Gaza as well.
So one of the areas that the army actually tells the civilians living in Gaza to evacuate to are hospitals. And yesterday, the Israeli military carried out an airstrike on a hospital in Gaza City. Of course, prior to the strike, they told the staff and the patients to evacuate. And in fact, no casualties were reported from this strike. And so the question is, what is the goal of this strike? Is it just assumed that it could be a place where Hamas is operating out from?
So the strike was very limited. And of course, there was a warning ahead of time. The army called hospital officials, told them to evacuate everybody. And the strike hit one building in the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza City is quite a big compound. It's not just one building. There's like a few dozen buildings in this big complex. And this strike took out one specific building, destroying it. According to the hospital, it was part of a genetic laboratory there, and it damaged also a nearby pharmacy and other emergency department buildings. And according to Israel, this specific site was being used by Hamas as a command center. Of course, because there was a warning ahead of time, there were no injuries in this strike. No Hamas members were killed because they let them know ahead of time. And they sort of have to when it comes to hospitals. It's very rare for Israel to strike a hospital without giving an early warning. We did see a case, I think it was a week or two ago, where a senior Hamas official was killed in a strike at a hospital, but that was also a very, very limited strike with a very small bomb that only hit one specific room in a building, didn't even take out the whole building. Striking hospitals is obviously a very sensitive matter, especially when civilians are sheltering there. And that's why Israel did give a warning in this case and destroyed this command center. Hamas will, of course, move their equipment and their operatives and go to another site to try and embed within civilian areas. We've seen them do it at schools as well and other civilian sites. There was another strike as well yesterday that hit another command center in Deir al-Balach. According to Palestinian media, it hit the Deir al-Balach municipality building. So again, it's another civilian site where Hamas is operating in it. In that strike, the army didn't issue a warning and there were several people killed in it.
Let's turn our gaze back into more domestic Israeli issues. And yesterday evening, about 6-ish, I was pushing my 3.5-year-old on a swing, and all of a sudden overhead, we heard a lot of boom, 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 boom. It appears that 2 ballistic missiles were shot from Yemen by the Houthis. One was apparently intercepted probably quite far from where I was standing, but we could definitely hear it in our Jerusalem adjacent home. And the other was shot down outside of Israel. Manny, tell us what you know about this.
So yeah, the Houthis are still firing missiles at Israel. It's they've been at it for a while now, even while the Americans carry out strikes in Yemen. Although I do think that the US's actions are having some effect on the Houthis' attacks on Israel. So in the past week or even 2 weeks, the Houthis have still been firing missiles, but they actually haven't been reaching Israel for all sorts of reasons. They've been falling short, mostly in Saudi Arabia or in Jordan or in the Red Sea. Other times they're shot down by the Americans, their forces in the Red Sea earlier. So no sirens sound in Israel and nobody hears anything. But this time, so they fired 2. One of them was shot down by Israel. The other one, I think, just fell short somewhere. It didn't reach the country. And the Houthis claim they targeted Ben Gurion Airport and the Sdot Micha Air Base, which is sort of between Jerusalem and Bet Shemesh in central Israel. No injuries this time, no damage. Part of the interceptor missile, or some shrapnel from the interceptor missile, landed near Hebron in the West Bank. The Houthis also claimed to launch a drone at Ashkelon yesterday, but the army doesn't know anything about that. It probably also just fell short along the way. It's quite far. It's almost 2,000 kilometers away. So these drones don't always make it to the country. These missiles don't always make it to the country. And it's, I think, mainly because the US is carrying out its strikes there. It is disrupting some of the Houthi attempts to launch attacks on Israel, although not completely, because they are still succeeding in getting some towards the country.
Right. And we may kind of talk about this with a poo-poo in our voice, but of course, this is not a normal situation to be swinging your 3.5-year-old and have missile sounds overhead. So something to keep in mind. Let's finish up with an exercise that was completed last week in Greece, in which Israel apparently practiced some aerial maneuvers with 11 countries, among them Qatar, and this was the first time that the IAF has completed exercises with Qatar. So, Manny, is it significant at all, or is it just another one of those weird firsts?
I think it's a weird first. I think it's kind of funny with the whole ongoing Qatar Gate sort of scandal that we have in the country. You know, Qatar's not really considered an enemy country, but it's definitely not one that Israel has official relations with, and it is the first time and that this sort of thing has happened, although the first time with Qatar, but not the first time with countries that Israel doesn't have relations with. But in this drill, and it's a drill that the Greece holds every year, the Air Force has participated in it several times in the last few years. It usually sends quite a few more planes. This time it only sent one plane, a spy plane, the G550 Gulfstream. I think it didn't send more because the Air Force is kind of preoccupied with the war and doesn't have the ability to send more planes right now. So just that the Qataris sent their F-15s to this drill. We don't know exactly, under what circumstances did they fly together, or was it a separate sort of thing? This drill focuses on a lot of things, on launching attacks and evading attacks and search and rescue. So we don't know the exact specifics of if they flew exactly alongside each other. But it is kind of, I think, quite amusing and quite a funny coincidence when we're speaking about the whole Qatar Gate scandal in Israel. I will note that several years ago, before Israel established relations with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and other Gulf states, Israel held also joint drills with them, some hosted by the US, some hosted by Greece and other countries. So it's not unprecedented for Israel to be involved in air drills with I guess unfriendly countries or countries that it doesn't have official relations with yet. There was also one with Pakistan in 2016, which is quite funny as well. Pakistan does not recognize Israel at all. But yeah, sometimes if it's hosted by the US and there's multiple countries involved, then it kind of goes under the radar a little bit.
Under the radar. Nice. Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode from any of our 3 podcast series, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.